So I recently finished André Gide's uh, the Immoralist, or in the French is Le Immoralista, something to that effect, and it came out in early 1900s, 1901 or two, and yeah, it is a pretty pretty it's got an insightful kind of commentary and different kinds of um, the events detailing of the main character Michel, who is it starts kind of with a caveat to that, telling that it is confided to three of his friends that were good friends of Michel, and they all kind of like talk about like what kind of happened, or with them. I think this is probably near the end of his life, or maybe it is the end of life in hindsight, and they're just kind of retracing the steps of like what he did to get to where he is, and they say it with kind of a weirdly like auguring kind of tone, which I guess was kind of, the more you read, the more maybe that sounds apt. But yeah, he's they talk about Michel from the way he was raised from his both parents until his mother died when he was only a teenager, and then he was raised on these Huguenot type religious customs which are very strict, and he didn't. It's said that he didn't like really take this seriously until a bit later into his life, but nonetheless, they were like very kind of rigid thing. Like they wouldn't let him really. They were limiting to his life, and but he ended up actually applying, or he to this school where he um, basically perfected all these different studies and like uh, languages, and he was a polyglot, and he was able to like speak like French and Sanskrit, Persian, and I think Greek, and probably more. And so he also and began to be very like fluent in all these different kind of uh, like almost like philology kind of customs, like stuff like he wrote an essay on the Phrygian religious customs, which was like really well received after its publication. And by the time he was 24, 25, he ended up marrying this um, young orphan girl who's very fragile and very um, a gentle soul named Marceline. And he quite doesn't quite understand her. He does it. The only reason he actually marries her is to appease his father, um, and to kind of carry down the lineage. But the whole time he's kind of keeping at bay these feelings of, which weren't too unlike Jide's own feelings in real life of um, vaguely homosexual, but more so like pederasty was what the idea that I got in the pretty lengthy kind of afterwards slash forwards. I think there was like actually two of them, and it was like, yeah, they went on and on about like Jida's own life, and like how he had to at certain points he like hit it, and like different things, and like even in French society, with Oscar Wilde was like for that very reason actually flew to Paris to kind of escape the strangling, the very strictures of like Ireland. So yeah, this but at this point, Michelle, yeah, they go on their honeymoon to Tunis, which in a Africa, along the kind of African coast. I don't know if it's the Ivory Coast. I think it's on the kind of northeast side or northwest side of Africa. And they see, he's kind of disillusioned with the ruins that he sees, like and I'm not quite sure what the reason for that was, but they end up leaving the capital, or one of the cities in Tunis, and Michel becomes ill with some version of tuberculosis, but it's kind of milder, and it's actually unclear whether he would survive. And for a lot of people, I think in early to late 1900s, I'm sorry, not the 1800s, early 1900s, definitely like for the last couple hundred through maybe a few hundred years, tuberculosis was like often the death knell. When if you were to give this to like a doctor's notice, they would have said like, I don't know what the odds that you'll even survive this year. But he ends up kind of going on a brisk convalescence, where he goes to Algeria, Biskra. That name shows up a lot, and they keep going. They have like kind of a love-hate relationship with Algeria, I guess, and this kind of right off the bat kind of reminded me a bit of Camus' relationship to Algeria, and being raised there, but then also being very French. So yeah, because of obviously the French occupation. So yeah, he ends up recovering, and there's a weird thing where I remember he kept mentioning, because it's first person. I shouldn't start this from the get go, but he Michel keeps like referring to how he keeps shaving, and he keeps like kind of obsessing over like weird, maybe not obsessing, but kind of fixating over different. It's the same word pretty much, but yeah, just over like certain things and customs, and like should I be shaved or should I not be shaved, and it like not really being able to decide, on it. But anyway, so he's ends up going to still in. They go through Italy, I think, and then he finds, he slowly begins to like have more respect, or more like consideration of Marceline, because she's he begins to actually, as one of the later kind of afterwards, I can't remember the person who wrote it, but he said that at first he doesn't even see like her as some sentient being, almost like he kind of sees her as just like a kind of walking kind of like almost like not even human, just kind of like a tag along person, and you kind of feel bad for Marceline. But then over throughout the novel, he actually learns to love her despite his own kind of inclinations not really being attracted. I mean, the honeymoon they had was very kind of loveless. They didn't actually consummate their marriage until well into the novel, and you can imagine the kind of guilt and all that he feels for her. And there's kind of an interesting kind of thing going on with that. And it reminded me a bit of Death in Venice by Thomas Mann, with the kind of that kind of restraint, that it's like the one constant theme running throughout the whole novel. Both of these things is restraint and like holding back. I'll go this far but no further. This attitude of like strong, like kind of like moral kind of like comeuppance if like you're gonna do anything wrong, or like this is the time of like this age of kind of holding back and repressing, like this of certain things. And like Nietzsche shows up again, I guess, and I think Gide said himself that Nietzsche was an influence in that, this idea of like like this idea of health, and that for Nietzsche was like to take care of oneself in a meaningful, like to not in an ascetic kind of Schopenhauerian kind of necessarily deny yourself, but like pleasure yourself in your own way, but without excess. Like gauge it for yourself, come up with your own values, like find meaning in your health, because that's like the very like there's so much more. I think there's like whole philosophies. I think what Nietzsche said something about this whole range is of the most words and the most wisdom beyond that is like found within your very bones, your tendons, not even in your intellect. Like he was like almost like sometimes came off as like anti-intellect, like like throw the dogmatist and the whole rationalists who are like very much just kind of necessitarian kind of ideas of like 1 + 1 = 2, something Dostoevsky kind of raved about. But this Michel starts to this point gets himself a estate that he works hardly on, because there's also this property caretaker named Bocage, and he has a son named Charles, I believe, that is on this other farm in a different part in Normandy, I believe. And Michel at first is like kind of just like not interested in any of this kind of high society, and he's or even like the farming life, because the farming, he finds it like a little bit too taxing and a little bit too much responsibility. Like he has to like upkeep with all the maintenance and all these different caretakers like cycling through, and some of them they all have their own particular things. Kind of remind me a bit of Russia, kind of a little bit with the serfs in Russia, and but yeah, there's a but yeah, he eventually grows a liking to Charles, and there's like a fatherly nature that he has, and as over time, Bocage basically informs Michel that Charles too will be going back up to Normandy, and uh, now at this point, Michel's wife Marceline is pregnant, and they both go back to Paris, and um, but he's also just very kind of disillusioned too with the like high society of Paris. And then there's this other guy named Minalki, who's these after he creates kind of all these lectures and stuff, like he goes back to lecturing, and there's like this other like kind of provocative figure named Menelik, who he befriends, and they both have a mutual kind of disdain for Paris. But with Menalki, sorry, there's like a he has like a different weird Hippocratic, not Hippocratic. I'm sorry, he's a hypocrite basically, because he's like double-minded, because he's like talking about how much he hates like this high, elitist Parisian, well-to-do, dandified higher class. Yet the whole entire time, um, Minalki is like has like servants running him around, and he lives a life of luxury and opulence, and it's just like it makes no sense. Um, but then he's maybe a part of it's like he's like self-deprecating in that sense. He's like, well, of course, I just hate myself, and then he just kind of runs back and forth, and he's like, well, I'll go to Normandy to live a simple life, and then he goes back, and it's like, so you see, like it's almost like Manelk is like one singular aspect, I guess, of like Michel. He's like a reflection of like kind of like how Michel, or of how he thinks at certain times. So he goes back to Normandy, and then Marceline falls sick too. She's like, I'm not sure what the illness is, but she's um they when they go back, he's so he oh yes, she has a miscarriage, tragically enough, and falls very sick, and he starts to very much like kind of think back and like cogitate hard on like what on his path in life, and like how, and there's like a long monologue at this point of Michel just like not rambling, but just like going on a long invective, kind of like what could have been if had he done something else. It's like a very existentialist kind of sentimentality. But then once Marceline recovers, they go back to traveling again, and then she feels that she's not well enough to like travel through the mountains of Normandy, so I think they ultimately go back to at first in the Alps, because this is a similar thing I've noticed in a lot of novels, that of people in various kind of Central European areas next to kind of near or around the Alps, like or adjacent with like Thomas Bernard's The Loser. There's like a lot of characters in that the two main characters end up recovering, because the air is so clean and crisp in the Alps. So but yeah, she's grows, but then she recovers for a time, but they decide to go back to Italy, and then they travel there, and there's kind of a restlessness here that's like they're going back and forth to all these different parts, and finally she passes away tragically in El Cantaria in Algiers. And yeah, it's her, like she spends her last days, and like he begins to like comfort her very tenderly. This is like the most tender you see Michel for Marceline, and in those moments when he's like hugging her with her arms, holding her on like dear life, it's quite beautiful. And then shortly after her death, Michel begins to write to his friends, and then asks them to visit him. And these are probably presumably the three friends that are at the beginning of the novel. So yeah, there's a interesting book, very interesting. Some points it felt like reminiscent of Dostoevsky, Thomas Mann, obviously. Little bit of Oscar Wilde too. Maybe a little bit less kind of with a decadence, but it's like more. It's the main theme here. I kept seeing was the like repression, and like holding back. Um, this theme of like what does that do to you? Because at certain points, like there were these young boys that earlier in the novel, these Algerian kind of like very tanned boys that were very just like kind of like very like kind of handsome, gorgeous young boys that had that Michel felt like an attraction towards, and he was like attracted toward these different boys. Like some of them would be he was attracted to like the troublemaker kind of boys. Forgetting his name, but one of them was like kind of reminded me of Tadzio from Death in Venice. But yeah, there's a lot of kind of like a attraction to like the unattainable, I guess, like this kind of forbidden fruit aspect of relationships. Like he sees Marceline as like kind of like sometimes as like a burden, and like she's often like like not pleased with the with much of the society that she's around, and but she's not bitter about it, but she's like she's not like into like kind of like material possessions at all. So I'm sorry, I was mistaken, that was somebody else. But yeah, there's a lot of like a good kind of amount of, I'm not sure, but guilt, I guess, like kind of regret that Michel feels like after kind of reevaluating his life in hindsight. And so that is The Immoralist by André Gide. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one.